Shogun Saints, more commonly known as Boxers of Loyalty and Righteousness, also known as Xiongyi Men, is a 1972 martial arts movie directed by Lung Xian and written by Yi Xiao. From the off, I feel I should point out that of all the titles, Shogun Saints seems like the most fitting of the three, mainly because I don't know what the last of these names translate to, and Boxers of Loyalty and Righteousness is not only a serious mouthful, but it's totally irrelevant to what actually happens in this film. There are no boxers or boxing featured in the film, and while there is a sort of sense of loyalty displayed through the movie, there's also a distinct lack of righteousness. That being said, some people who are good with swords who are sort of loyal but lack conviction is a terrible martial arts movie name. So for snappiness and the fact that the VHS I own is called Shogun Saints, I'm going to go ahead and call this one Shogun Saints. The film follows Yip Tin Sin, the son of a general who's killed in action by another general of a ruthless rival army. Yip vows complete vengeance on the general's regime and spends his life training in martial arts and swordsmanship with the aim to assassinate the general, who's now more of a king of swords. The film opens in the past, but then jumps forwards to an adult Yip sneaking into a fortress with the aim to take out the general. His assassination attempt fails, and he's brutally beaten and poisoned. However, he's rescued by a local house servant and taken to a nearby house to recuperate. It transpires that the house is maintained by a brother and sister, both of whom are very skilled martial artists. They see that Yip is a good man and offer to look after him until he's fully recovered. Meanwhile, the general, terrified by the assassination attempt and mourning the death of his rather large offspring, decides to hunt Yip down once and for all, and so a manhunt begins, with Yip and the brother and sister duo fighting to survive the general's men, while also trying to avenge Yip's relatives in a battle for good and evil that may well cost them their lives. Lung Xian seemingly has quite a decent filmography for this kind of thing. In fact, with over 30 directing credits, plus some additional writing credits that are all mostly based in this genre, it would seem that he's pretty much got the style down pat. Indeed, from a directing perspective, this film's a pretty good example of the martial arts genre when handled well. The cast, while animated, restrain themselves to a point which allows for a more subtle performance to be given. I mean, these films are normally very overacted, and this film, by Western standards, would definitely still be considered hammed up. But when compared to the likes of Crazy Guy with Super Kung Fu, it's positively straight in terms of its actions. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's the odd ham-tastic moment, but for the most part the cast express nicely, and I really feel like the director got exactly what he wanted out of this picture. No one ever feels like they're just standing around, and there's a real emphasis on movement, both inside and outside of the frame. Speaking of the framing, the cinematography is also pretty decent, with a good range of shot types and a little bit of experimentation thrown into the mix as well. It has a solid style that really helps to carry the film through its 3 acts. Plus, this film has crash zooms, and I'm a total sucker for a well-timed crash zoom. If anything, the only criticism I have here is that I do feel they maybe could have lent a little bit more on the experimentation front. It's fine as it is, and it looks pretty good on the whole, especially when compared to some of the tat I've seen in my time, but maybe with a bit more of a creative flourish, there could have been some very interesting shot developments used in this one. Again though, I very much get the feeling that the director here pretty much got what he wanted. Sadly, these two elements are the best that this film has to offer, and the worst offender that I can point to for this film's shortcomings lie in the script. This film was written by Yi Xiao. He only has 8 writing credits to his name, and the scripting of this film is just slop. It really is. There's no better word for it, really. The first act is relatively solid, but I think it personally suffers a bit from some structural issues. And while it does set up the film pretty nicely, it quickly gives way to the second act, in which the movie basically devolves into a tug of war, with Yip fighting the General's guards, the brother and sister duo fighting the General's guards, and the guards temporarily capturing the gang only for them to escape. It's all rinse and repeat stuff really, and while the closing of the second act aims to give some further development to the story, it's all too little too late. The final act is a joke. It's literally a 20 to 25 minute extended fight sequence, and that's it. There's no real plot development, barring one major plot twist that I could see coming a mile away, and this fight scene just rolls on and on till the end moments. It's a fundamental issue I have with some of these martial arts movies, and this isn't the first time I've encountered this kind of thing. You're watching a great martial arts flick, and then the last 20 to 30 minutes suddenly just turn into one super long fight scene with a hastily written ending. It gets really boring very quickly. Personally, I think martial arts films are at their best when they play up the motivation for our characters to be doing what they're doing, while at the same time keeping the fight sequences themselves tightly edited and concise. If you have a fight scene that goes on for longer than 10 minutes, I'm just going to start clock watching. I mean, to my mind, 8 minutes, unless it's something utterly spectacular, is too long to watch two people jump around trying to hit each other. I'd rather have a movie that had shorter fight scenes than what Shogun Saints does here in having half a dozen fight scenes that culminate to one 20-minute fight to the death. The characters themselves come across as fairly engaging, but the dialogue isn't the strongest written in the world, and the translated lines feel way too theatrical to be taken seriously. Weirdly though, the English voiceover cast for this film are a bit of a mixed group. Half the cast seem to be taking the dubbing of this film very seriously, whereas the other half are seemingly from the Wing Chun Dragon Lives Again school of voice acting. In fact, at one particular point in the film, we're introduced to the brother and sister's uncle, and while I can't be 100% sure, I'm certain he appeared giving his best Kenneth Williams impression in both Wing Chun and The Dragon Lives Again. This mixture of cast believability ultimately leaves the film feeling a bit tonally lost, which when the script is already very weak and the dialogue's a bit overly dramatic, only emphasises just how bad in places it can be. The fight sequences equally kinda left me with a split opinion. On the one hand, they're very creative, fast-paced, and show a good range in terms of usage of props and in showcasing our heroes' skills. Only adding to this further is good implementation of contact and camera placement, which makes it look like they're actually fighting and not just throwing their hands and feet near each other. And there's some really decent lighting that's used very well in places to mask the lack of contact and also to help cover up some less than stellar martial arts work. That's some real creative thinking in action, so I have to give them credit for that. However, on the other hand, it does rather slip into unbelievable territory at times. When the film is aiming to play it straight more or less as this one does, having one guy fight and beat 15 to 30 men on his own at the same time, almost effortlessly, is distinctly unbelievable, and it kinda takes you out of the action when you realise the guy's just destroying armies by himself with little to no effort. On the whole, I'd say the fight scenes work well, especially when contrasted with the non-fight scenes, which, while a touch generic, do add a new flavour into the mix in terms of direction and cinematography. But the film's a bit confused as to what it wants to be in that sense. While most of this film takes place in open fields, I also have to stress that some of the sets in this movie look absolutely bloody awful. In particular, a scene that sticks out in my mind is near the beginning when Yip storms the castle, and the cobblestone walls behind the main cast could not look any more like polystyrene if they tried. It's clear that the budget didn't go anywhere near this scene. Though as I mentioned, because the majority of this film is set outside, it does mean that this can be overlooked somewhat, so I guess that's a plus. I should also point out that while the soundtrack's not at all bad, it's somewhat misplaced. They have a pretty decent mixture of period-style classical arrangements, which contrast with more action-infused synth numbers to really help deliver a pretty decent viewing experience. I mean, it's by no means memorable, but it works for this kind of film. But even with a good soundtrack, it's fairly poorly implemented. There are scenes here where the soundtrack starts too early, or starts too late, or worse still, scenes where music should be playing, but it just doesn't play at all. And this can really put a strain on certain scenes, because without that musical cue in place, the film's just awkward. It can make things feel really off at times, and it can totally spoil the mood and atmosphere that the film's trying to create. Shogun Saints was released on VHS by Capitol Home Video, and since then, in the UK at least, it's never seen a re-release. What was notable about this VHS release is that it has no notices, no warnings, no trailers, or idents on the tape itself. The tape starts with a load of static, and then the film just fades in. And at the end, the film just abruptly stops, again with no idents or trailers or anything. Which I don't think I've actually seen on an official release before. I also have to say that while the screen grabs on the box are ridiculously low res, the print itself here is actually surprisingly high quality. I've seen a lot of martial arts films on DVD in my time, but this one, in terms of picture quality, actually manages to beat quite a few of them. Also, this film is a certificate 18, which it shouldn't be. This movie should be a 12. It just should. It has no swearing, nudity, only very mild violence in it. It was only later that I remembered that this film came out, however, during the period where the BBFC were terrified that if anyone under the age of 17 got a hold of a martial arts film, we'd end up with an army of hidden ninjas ready to psychotically kill on a whim. But this movie's so tame, I really just can't stand that it's made out to be much worse than it is. What I can say is that this film is available, very bizarrely, on Amazon Video under their Prime service, under the Boxers of Loyalty title. I don't know how it got on there, but in all honesty, all I can say is don't bother. You'd be wasting your time. What we're dealing with here, ladies and gents, is a grey zone movie. While its Cinean direction is very well handled, a liquid script coupled with some ropey music cues and dubbing really pull this film down. A handful of the fight scenes are well handled, but there are a few of them that go on for way too long and really don't add anything to the overall experience. It's just an ever so slightly boring movie, and all I can say is it's really probably not worth bothering with. It's a good example of the martial arts genre in a generic sense. But generic is probably the best thing I can say for it. You could probably pull a few decent clips out of the movie, but otherwise it's really not worth your time.